Hello, I'm Kay Lemon, Executive Director of the Marketing Science Institute. As many of you know, nonprofit MSI serves as the bridge between marketing theory and business practice, and our goal is to move the needle on significant marketing problems. We do this by funding research by leading academics worldwide on topics voted on by our 70-plus corporate sponsors and disseminating that research through members-only events and a variety of publications. I'm very pleased to welcome you to another MSI For Members by Members webinar. This is a series of webinars on subjects related to MSI's current research priority topics. First, I'd like to point out the Chat with Presenter function in the left-hand corner of your screen. Please use this feature throughout the presentation to send through any questions you have for our presenter. We'll gather the questions and have a brief Q&A session following the presentation. Now I'd like to introduce you to today's featured speaker. I'm very excited to have Raj Venkatesan with us today. Raj is Professor of Business Administration at the University of Virginia's Darden School of Business, where he teaches marketing technology products, marketing strategy, and marketing analytics. His research focuses on analytics as it relates to marketing return on investment, customer lifetime value, mobile marketing, and the global political economy. It's really in the sweet spot of what our members care about. His research appears in all of marketing's top journals, and he's also a co-author of the book Cutting Edge Marketing Analytics. Raj's research has also been recognized by prestigious awards, and 2 of those awards are actually MSI awards. He was a winner of our MSI Alden G. Clayton Dissertation Award when he was an early scholar, and was recognized as part of our Young Scholars program several years later. And he continues to work with us on several initiatives, and we're thrilled to call him a longtime MSI friend. Raj also has consulted with firms in many of your industries: technology, retailing, media, B2B, pharmaceutical. He's developed custom executive education for several different companies, and his work is just really spot on and fits exactly with the rigor and relevance that we aspire to at MSI. And so, Raj, I'm very excited to welcome you, and we look forward to your talk.
Thank you, Kay, and thank you, MSI, for hosting this webinar. I'm very excited to be here and present my ongoing research on the topic of building a data analytics orientation. I've been involved with this research for about 2 to 3 years now, and I have, through this research, talked to several senior executives across a variety of industries, including media, manufacturing, financial services, and retail. And what I'm planning to do today is share some of my preliminary thoughts in this research, and also present some of the propositions I have as to what are some of the enablers that help organizations build a data analytics orientation. And this is a process I've been conducting for the last year, where I'm road testing this framework and seeking input from different industries and executives. And of course, I'll be happy to continue the conversation with any of you if you would be so interested. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank Teradata for funding part of this research. They have been very helpful in supporting this research, and I definitely thank them for that. So what is the data analytics orientation, and what is the motivation for this research? So I don't have to say, and you know that there's a lot of buzz about big data and analytics these days. There were 2 statistics that I found to be very interesting that I wanted to present here as to say that this topic is in top of mind of executives. One is more in the sense that data is growing exponentially. Right? The digital universe, this report by IDC says, is going to grow by a factor of 10 to 4.4 trillion gigabytes, from 4.4 trillion to 44 trillion. I don't know what that really means or how you get that much data, but it seems like a lot, and it's happening very fast. And HBR published a study which showed that companies who are on the top third of their industry in using data in their decision making are on average 6% more profitable than their competitors. And there have been some successes. And I will share one of those successes with you today, just as an example of a company that has really taken data as part and parcel of its business model. So let's talk about Weather Company, and this is sourced from a Harvard Business Publishing case study on the Weather Company. And basically the story goes that in 2008, Landmark Communications, which was based out of Norfolk, Virginia, sells the Weather Channel to a consortium of NBC, Bain, Capital, and Blackstone, and is also facing competition from Monsanto, Yahoo, and Google. And it's really questioning its relevance in the presence of new competition. So in 2012, David Kenny steps in as CEO. He acquires Weather Central and Weather Underground. So Weather Underground is interesting because most weather services, the data comes from the National Weather Service. And that data is the same for all the people who are providing weather information. But Weather Underground, on the other hand, uses consumers and real-time reports from them to give more accurate information on weather. So Weather Company sees this as an opportunity to get some new data, new information that's going to enhance their product. And then they do something that's very striking, right? So they take all this information, their capabilities with analytics, and then transform it to start industry-specific applications. Targeted advertising for consumers, for like in Walmart, if there is rain, what do people buy? I heard something like more people buy berries when there is wind. I don't know why, but there is a relationship apparently. There is for total turbulence for aviation. I'm sure pilots would like to know when there is turbulence. Weather information in car systems, and also for nonprofits and disaster relief zones like Red Cross. So they have used data in a lot of different ways to really change their business model to become more than just a channel, to be Weather Company, a data-driven company. But something very interesting happens after this story, right? In 2015, IBM buys the Weather Company. I see a message on the chat. I hope everyone is still able to hear me. Great. Thank you. So IBM decides to buy Weather Company. So why does IBM buy the Weather Company? What is the reasoning here? Why would they want to do that? So the main interesting part of the story here is the head of the Weather Company becomes head of Watson Analytics in IBM. So the Weather Company story transforms into another company who has also changed themselves a lot over the years and are now really transforming themselves into a data-driven company. So the Watson history ends up, as many of you might know, before 2006, and shows its power in 2011 with the Jeopardy challenge, and then really after that gets into different industry applications similar to the Weather Channel, in healthcare, in financial services, and now very recently in retail, where they start to power the personal shopper app that is provided by Macy's. And this is different than many apps because it's cognitive. It learns with the consumer about their preferences, and it really behaves as a personal shopping assistant, and it is powered by Watson in the back. So this is an example of a companies that have really pulled in data and data-driven decision making and creating data products that are very useful in different industries and for consumers. But there is a catch. The ability to harness big data for insights is still considered rare. We hosted an MSI conference in Darden in 2014, and using analytics was found as a major challenge by many executives in the meeting. A Duke CMO survey shows companies are not using analytics, not evaluating the quality of analytics. So 86% of the respondents in a McKinsey quarterly also said that their organizations have been at best only somewhat effective at meeting the primary objective of their data and analytics programs. So while you saw the success of the weather company and what IBM has been doing, you also have these other challenges where companies are struggling to bring data into decisions at their highest levels. So this motivates my research in this topic and what I have been trying to find the answers to for the last few years. The first question I have is, what is the process adopted by firms that harness data analytics in their marketing strategy? So that is what I call a data analytics orientation. Harnessing data and analytics in your strategy, including in your marketing decisions. The second question I have is, can we identify organizational factors that enable a data analytics orientation? What are some of the factors that help companies develop an analytics orientation? So the guiding principle I have for this analytics orientation comes from strategy. The strategy, the framework that I'm using is the value creation and appropriation framework. So in my world, strategy is concerned about how an organization creates and captures economic value and is reflected in the choices they make about how they will compete and how they will serve their customers. So the process I'm proposing is a 5-step process which really starts with the business challenge. What is the effective business challenge faced by the company? What is the strategic challenge in front of the company? So what I'll present now is this model and explanations of each of these boxes, and I'll give you an example of SAP in their HANA product portfolio as to how they are facing this business challenge today. So it starts with the business challenge, but the next box is, what is a metric that the organization is trying to drive, and how are they using this metric to evaluate the different strategic options in front of them to address this challenge? And the mental models that I have here is primarily about what is this hypothesis that the company has about how the market works. So if you did not have data, how do you think your actions affect customers and competition? That's what we call as a mental model. And once you have this mental model, what is the data that you have to populate this mental model? And then what is the analytics that you can use to generate insights? But once the insights are generated, you also need to drive transformation. What is the different actions the company will take as a result of these insights? If the insights don't generate different actions, then what is the value of those insights? And then once the transformation is accomplished and you've executed on your insights, you learn from them and a new business model is created and you have new business challenges, and also you've updated your mental model with the data and insights that you have, and the cycle continues. So to go deeper into each of these boxes, if you see strategic challenges, is the data-driven process begins with the identification of important business problems that can be addressed using analytics and data. And there are many helpful tools for doing this. You have like the Canvas business tool or the gut matrix, which is your gravity, urgency, and threat matrix that you can use to rank order the different challenges and find the ones that are most relevant and most important at this point. The next step is the mental model and metrics. So let's consider a hypothetical example of Pfizer. Now, the metric that Pfizer, a pharmaceutical company like Pfizer, might be driving is profit per physician, how much money they can make out of an individual physician. Now, the profit per, and that is the metric part of it. Now, everything to the left of the profit per physician is the mental model that people within Pfizer could develop and build on their own. Right? And it's a common mental model for the organization as to how their actions affect customer, in this case, physician reactions. So the profit per physician could be basically number of new prescriptions times whether the physician is still a customer for Pfizer minus the marketing cost. So marketing would be coming from sales calls and direct-to-consumer advertising, and they can affect brand attitudes of the physician, and through this affect the number of new physicians. Now, I also have another link from number of new prescriptions to brand attitudes because customer usage and experience can also affect brand attitudes. So all of these are, this whole setup is called a mental model, which the company thinks is a hypothesis as to how their actions affect customer reactions. The next step is data. What data is available to measure every part of the mental model, and if exact measurement is even possible, and what are the proxies? For example, if you look at brand attitudes over here, the most common way to gather brand attitudes is to survey physicians. But if you do that, you don't have that data for all the physicians. You may have to think about some sampling or imputation in order to execute your strategy. So those are some of the questions you need to ask before jumping into the analytics and insights. So what type of data is it? It's structured or unstructured. Sales call or direct-to-consumer advertising could be structured, but brand attitudes could also be inferred from blogs or Twitter postings, and that would be unstructured data. And is the data available for all customers or only a sample of the customers? And that would be relevant for the brand attitudes part which we just discussed. What is the reliability and consistency of the data? And what are the firm's values in working with this data? Are you willing, there might be some data that you could use, but it's not ethical or it's not part of the regulations. So what are the firm values in working with the data is another thing that needs to be considered at this stage. Then the insights part begins where you're looking at analytics and tools the managers can use to generate the insights. So you're using these insights to estimate parts of your mental model, such as the relationship between sales calls and direct-to-consumer advertising and brand attitudes and number of new prescriptions and retention. So these are the things that you need to test, whether if you believe sales call affects number of new prescriptions, and also how many sales calls does it take to improve prescriptions by 1 unit. Those are the things that you would use empirical data and historic data to test. And a variety of tools can be used in this case, descriptive, predictive, and prescriptive. Finally, the transformation part comes in where it's more than a technology issue. Right? It's a leadership issue that calls for organizational change. So this is where I think one could draw on the tools in design thinking, and you can reach outside of analytics, where you're trying to understand through the design thinking method what are the necessary organizational changes necessary to drive this insights and changes. And think of the people within your organizations as customers, and those stakeholders, and empathize with those stakeholders and understand their needs and real motives for their actions, and how the new insights affects their world, and how can you design the new system in a way that you get buy-ins from the stakeholders who you're going to affect in the future. As one chief marketing scientist in the media industry told me, In the end, it comes down to implementation. What is implementable? So any analytics that is done, unless you see some implementation value in it, there is no point in running through all of these. So the value of implementation needs to be considered even in the beginning with the business challenges stage itself. And that is also why I present it as a circle, because although the human mind likes to think of things sequentially, we really need to be thinking about the whole system in one shot, and also think about implementation and transformation right at the stage of the business challenges. So now, if you look at an example as to how this gets implemented, let's consider the case of SAP and their cloud platform, SAP HANA. The strategic challenge for them in this cloud platform could be improve customer acquisition and retention. The strategic options in front of them are, can I design new customized product offerings and develop a modular pricing strategy and optimize individual prices? So these are two different options in front of them, and they can evaluate these options through their acquisition rate, cost of acquisition, retention rate, or customer lifetime value. Now the mental model they could be using is that they believe that they could connect end-user behaviors like time spent on different features, how much the customer is willing to pay, tenure, industry characteristics, service quality, training process of the salesperson, etc., to acquisition cost, acquisition rate, and retention rate. The data they could be using could come from historic data on end-user interactions with HANA, customer surveys, non-customer surveys, etc. The insights and analytics could be driven through a variety of models. Customer churn could be driven through binomial logits or decision trees. Next product could be to buy could be driven by multivariate logits or probits. Acquisition model could be a media attribution model. Profits could be found through dynamic panel regression, vector auto regressions, and pricing could also be tested through experiments. The insights are using customers using Salesforce modules are more profitable. Let's say that after all this analysis, now HANA finds that the customers who used their Salesforce module are the most profitable. Now what does it mean in terms of transformation? Now the transformation part comes in where the sales model shifts from heavy customer presence to almost no customer presence for them, selling small subscription services rather than big installs. An engineering and sales team needs to develop new products, for example, new Salesforce functionality based on insights from analytics. So all of these are big shifts and that are driven by data and that need to be considered, and people in the product teams and sales team need to be on board up front. So to recap, this is the model for a process for data-driven marketing strategy. You have business challenges that you begin with that are mapped to metrics and the mental model of the firm. You use data to test the mental model, and analytics and insights that are driven by analytics about what is the new way in which you want to function and address the strategic challenges, and drive those changes through a transformation of the organization that then leads to the next wave of new business challenges. But throughout this process, you are also learning about all these changes. Now, the next phase of the presentation today is going to be about the enablers of the data-driven process. What are the different enablers that allow some organizations to be more effective in this analytics orientation than others? So the 5 enablers that I've identified include firms having a strategic emphasis on customers, clarity on the strategic challenges and key performance metrics, adopting a design thinking approach to solving the business problems, overcoming the past success paradox, and data scientists becoming actually data curators. So I'll elaborate in the next few minutes on each of these enablers. Strategic emphasis on customers. One of the senior executives in a financial services firm said something that really struck me. He said, I can get silos to work together and get me data across organizational boundaries if I talk about the customer service and how going this extra mile could make a difference in the customer's life. So this is what firms that are customer-oriented are capable of doing. They are capable of breaking down silos and sharing information across the organization, which is one of the main pillars in terms of understanding the entire customer relationship with a firm. An example of such a company could be Samsung, where if you see over the last 15 years, this is the data from Interbrand on their brand rankings. So the blue line is their rank, so lower number is better. They have gone from 43 to 8, and the value of the brand has gone from 5 billion to about 45 billion. And there have been articles written about how they did this. One of the things that's behind their big process is looking at data and looking at what their customers value and improving customer loyalty through a relentless focus on data. And one of the ways they do this is through this kind of matrix which they call MNet, right? M as in Mary, net. And they basically use this kind of data where they are, say, for one product, they are trying to allocate resources across different countries. So in this case, UK has a 10% allocation, but they want to reduce it to 0, and that ideal allocation, which is how much they should do on the y-axis, comes from a variety of data sources, including in-depth customer surveys, the past history, and all of that, and they drive these resources through religiously through a system like this. And we saw the result of this kind of discipline. A chief innovation officer in a manufacturing firm told me we need to understand the end consumer needs to better develop products for our customers. So these guys supply to, it's a B2B firm, so they supply to customers who make products and then supply to the end consumers. But what they're trying to do, this religious focus on end consumers and this customer orientation is now driving them to use text data from salesperson reports and consumer blogs and have them harnessed to understand and anticipate customer needs. So you can see how a customer orientation drives people to find new sources of data and use that to infuse it into either the resource allocations or even new product development. Now the second one is clarity on strategic challenges and key performance metrics. One of the things I've been seeing across firms is market disruptions and new business ventures generate new data possibilities, but they can also create a need to revise performance metrics and to develop capabilities, new capabilities to glean insights from new kinds of consumer data. So let's take the example, hypothetical example of ESPN. They first started by on the cable channels. They were the providers for cable providers. And then they started Watch ESPN app where consumers could use the Watch ESPN app to watch games as long as they had a cable subscription. And then they did something new in the last World Cup, the Cricket World Cup. They went directly to consumers and said, look, if you pay us $100, you can watch the whole World Cup, and you don't need an ESPN subscription to do that. So now they formed a direct relationship with the consumer, similar to Netflix, away from the cable providers. So as they're going through these different platforms, their relationship and metrics change. When they were first providing cable, their metrics is primarily, are my cable companies happy with me? When they got to the Cricket Pass, they are now like Netflix looking at customer acquisition and retention and customer lifetime value. But these are key metrics, and if changes in these metrics, you can think one of the companies I've worked with has gone through a lot of turmoil and a lot of internal soul searching to identify what is really the metric we should be focused on. And without knowing that, they are struggling in terms of knowing how to develop the analytics capabilities, because it requires different capabilities if you're selling to cable or if you're directly selling to consumers. And within that firm, the senior director of marketing insights, she told me something which was very interesting. She said, we tend to use analytics less when many groups are involved. Decision making is more complex. A multi-dimensional decision leads to less use of data and analytics, which is very interesting because that's when you need analytics. But what happens in a lot of firms is the decision becomes more important and more people get involved. Somehow analytics is not used because it becomes a complex issue that is difficult to solve. But firms that are able to do this well, use analytics in the relevant spaces, are able to do that by breaking complex problems into small parts, knowing when to combine data and heuristics, and developing rapid prototyping and a test and learn methodology where they synchronize decision cycles. So what do I mean by that? One of the things is including a lot of people to ask in the strategic analysis step itself. The CEO of a firm in the banking industry told me, and they have been very good in analytics and using analytics in their operations, is we want analytics to ask the questions, not just fulfill requests from the line managers. So including analytics up front, having everyone participate up front is actually a nice thing, and this also combines with combining data and heuristics like industry rules. Like when you don't have data, you can use industry rules such as trade short-term and long-term effects are about the same. Advertising effect is over the long term 2x of the short-term effect. These are some heuristics that could be included into the model, into a Bayesian updating framework, something like this, where management could come up with different weights, where when they have no data, they're using priors, which are management believes that the long-term effect of advertising is 2x the short-term effect, or as new data comes in for products, relying more on the marketing mix models. The rapid prototyping example was given to me by a company that is in the car retailing industry, similar to Auto Trade. What they do is they meet in 2-week cycles. And the challenge that they are facing now is how do they change the margin of the different cars that they're selling and the SKUs that they're selling. They have been using a standard markup, and they're trying to do a more sophisticated pricing strategy. And they face some resistance from operations and finance because, as you can imagine, changing different prices can create some inefficiencies in operations and, of course, mess up some of the financials. And over time, it's a good thing, but it can have some short-term challenges. So what they do is they meet in these they have these agile meetings where the CMO, COO, CFO, and the Chief Analytics Officer come together, decide on what they want to do, figure out experiments that they can conduct, SKUs and regions they can test, and then the groups are given directives on what needs to be done, and within 2 weeks they collect the results, meet again to see what happened, and co-create the next phase. And they have seen that this process actually gets people involved across organizations, and they've started using data more rapidly in their decision making. The fourth thing is overcoming the past success paradox. One of the things that I have been hearing, which is very striking, is the companies least likely to use data are the ones that have been successful already without using data, but in the past in an environment that was very different than what they are facing now. So, and it could also be a function of the natural growth of the company, that at one stage they did not need data, but later they needed data and they're not able to use it. So a CMO of a company in the financial services industry told me once, and we work very closely with them, is they're really good at using analytics in one division, in terms of designing the products. In financial services, you can imagine analytics can be used a lot in designing products. But they really did not use analytics for branding or for any kind of marketing. But as they've become a bigger and bigger company and they're facing different competition, the need for a brand story is coming up to be much higher for them, and that's a strategic imperative. But what they're struggling with is actually trying to move this capability in one phase to another phase. So the ability to transport capabilities that you have in analytics in one place to another becomes very important, so you don't become stuck in the past success paradox. Lastly, you want data scientists to also be data curators. This quote by Kipling is very telling here. If history were taught in the form of stories, it would never be forgotten. This tells the power of storytelling, and it's also there is research which tells why people like John Oliver are powerful is because they're more powerful than the evening news networks is because while CNN may talk about some abstract happening in some neighborhood somewhere else, in some remote location in the world, people like John Oliver or Jon Stewart who started this all actually make it about you and me. They tell stories about you and me, and that's how they deliver the news, and that's why they're more powerful. So, and words matter. This is a word cloud, and this was presented in the conference, MSI conference that we hosted about word cloud of Kroger before and after they became customer centric. The bottom word cloud, as you can see, there is no customer in the annual reports. But in the top word cloud, you see there's a lot of customers. So this is a telling way in which they have changed to be more customer focused. And this is, again, another example about how words are really important and how you need to use data to actually tell the story of the business. For any companies that are successful are able to use data to justify their actions, to understand what they need to do, and also tell a story and treat analytics as a form of curation and visualization to support the narrative. So the 5 enablers to recap are strategic emphasis on customers, clarity on strategic challenges and KPMs, adopting a design thinking approach and agile framework of rapid prototyping, overcoming the past performance paradox, and treating data scientists also as data curators. And I will I'll stop with this slide of the framework up here, and then I think we have sufficient time left now for questions if there are any. Happy to take questions at this point.
Hey Raj, this is Kay again. That was great. And as we begin to move into the Q&A session, a reminder to participants, please type your questions directly through the Chat with Presenter function in the left-hand corner of your screen. And one of the things I'd like to highlight that I think is so special about MSI is that you're sharing your thinking with us in real time as it's being developed. And I think that's one of the wonderful thing about academics like you, Raj, who are so connected to cutting-edge marketing practice, but it's also such a cool thing about MSI that you kind of can get access to this thinking, 2-3 years before it would come out in any specific document. And so, Raj, questions that have come up that I thought maybe we'd go back to your model, the one that's on the screen. And one of the questions that I'd like you to expound upon a little bit is kind of identifying where these mental models come from and how you see them as distinct from what we might talk about as traditional linkage models or, attribution models or, like an NPS model where we're trying to, go back and identify the specific marketing actions that have an impact. I like this notion that that firms and managers have, these hypothesized mental models in their head, but I'm just wondering if you make a distinction between these broader mental models that perhaps are not articulated and the econometric models that perhaps companies are currently using in their analytics.
Yeah. So I think my notion of mental models is more on the former, the broader heuristics that are in managers' minds that have not been put down in pen and paper or documented enough in terms of what they think, how the market works. And then it could be then operationalized using data, and then the econometric models like attribution modeling could come in to actually put some data to test this mental model. So I think because many times when you go directly into the econometric model, you kind of get stuck with what kind of data you have on what you can do and not really think broadly about what are the different influences that could happen. And so it is almost like you're thinking about, in academics we talk about theory and what is a theory, but this is pretty much the similar part for practice, where you're trying to understand how do you think our business works. And I think a lot of companies know this. They believe certain truths, and sometimes they don't test this. So this is a process where you call, like in design thinking it's called assumption surfacing, but it's more about how do you think the world works? How do our actions affect customers? How does our customer purchase from us? And what do you think the competition would do to react to us?
Oh, that's really helpful. And then kind of going back even to the first piece on business challenges, a question has come in that says, how do you assess the adequacy of fully understanding business challenges? And I think what's meant by that is kind of, how do you recognize whether you're actually doing that well, or whether maybe you have blinders on and you're not really understanding the key business challenges? Any insights on how to improve that piece?
That's a great question. I think that's a challenge many companies face with. And it also goes back to this thing about what are how to ask the right question. If you don't ask the right question, then the whole piece is going towards alley which is not useful. And I think one of the things that I'm working on right now is also looking at, like I said, the Canvas business model. So you kind of look at a business model from the top down, and I think you have to go through this process of understanding, like, there are many ways in which you can look at it, right? So what is the gravity of the situation, urgency, threat to the business, and relevance of the challenge to the business. So some factors can be used to assess whether it is relevant or not. And really this is a place where it has to be talked through at the organization level, and it also is useful if you bring in people across the different silos to input into this. And this could be also a function of where you go through your quarterly strategic reviews to use them actually to input into, these are the things that we are struggling with, and this is what we need to drive.
Oh, that's really helpful. Now, because as you've talked about kind of getting the entire organization engaged, one of the things we hear often at MSI is about the democratization of data across the organization, and so kind of just getting more and more people access to the data. A specific question that kind of comes in on that from one of the participants is, can you talk a little more about the balance needed between curation and storytelling and enabled broad access to data metrics through self-service tools to ensure broader engagement with KPMs and data throughout an organization? So I think this notion is you've got the curation and storytelling kind of around the insights to lead to the transformation, but you also have the value in the democratization of data, making the data more accessible throughout the organization to kind of lead to that transformation of the organization itself. So how do you see those tensions play out, and what do you see as best practice?
So I think democratization of data is, I hear that a lot too, and I think what I'm saying is that data, it's different layers. So the curation and the story of the business that is told through data is also democratized. That people, whenever when companies are having meetings or conversations about their strategy, they are defending it with data. That data is the language of the business, that any decision you're making or any option you're presenting is backed using data. So that becomes the language. And but to be that, it needs to be then treated as a curation, where you're thinking about data as a part and parcel of the story of your business. And so in my mind then, there is data that comes real time in a very technical world, that's the data that's the raw data. But then you have layers on top of it, where you have some kind of descriptive statistics, and then you have some kind of reports, which are basically things that is the storytelling with the data, that what are the insights that we have as part of the data. And part of the democratization that I also feel is that you need to have the mental models also democratized, that employees understand and have a part in contributing to saying how our mental model works and what learnings we have about that. So that is also part of the data that needs to be distributed.
Oh, yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense. First, it needs to be articulated and then distributed. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I was intrigued by was when you were talking about kind of identifying the key metrics. And I wondered, you talked about the example of ESPN and Auto Trader and how they had some market disruptors. And I'm wondering if, when you think about the KPMs and how they perhaps need to change as the market gets disrupted or things evolve, can you use key metrics as any kind of an early indicator of market disruption, or do you need to kind of be looking for those market disruptors elsewhere and recognize that you might get lulled into complacency with your KPMs? Does that make sense?
That's interesting, because I think on the one hand, if you're too focused on your existing metrics, that also means you're too focused on your current market, and you kind of get blindsided by the new market, new disruptors. And I think what we have, the example in ESPN in this company was they played in the new market, although they were a little slow to get there. But what's happening is the existing structures have always been in the older, and they have been structured in a way that they were in the older economy. And so this process, and so they're already successful there. So that also happens in any market disruption. Is like the incumbents are so successful that they see the world through that view, whatever happens, because the disruption is still not clear as to the value of that. So what that translates into like analytics and others that I'm seeing is new business models imply new metrics, and they're not sure whether that is what they want to drive. And I think that is where experimentation and prototyping and flexibility is important, that they are able to hedge the bets on both the markets, which means for some part you may have to have two different competing metrics and two different competing stories.
Right, in that process while you're kind of migrating and moving from one approach to the other. Now, on that question of rapid prototyping, a question comes up particularly in highly regulated industries like pharma. If you have any suggestions for kind of a way to implement that rapid prototyping and experimentation, because they have layers of approval and regulatory and legal. One idea that comes to my mind on that is that, again, kind of, partnering with academics like you or other folks that MSI is connected to, academics can often do scenario-based experiments that are related to questions that firms have that are not with a firm's actual customers. And so that's one approach that I was thinking of. But do you have other suggestions of how you can do that experimentation and rapid prototyping when you have that regulatory environment?
That's interesting because it's hard to answer without knowing what kind of regulations or challenges are there. But I think in a very broad sense, what you say is right, Kay. It's more about can you do like simulations, and so that's where some of the mental models help is because you can really simulate different scenarios like game theoretical models to see what actually happens, and and what the competitive reaction would be, or even scenario planning in terms of saying what is the risk involved. So one of the things I've heard some people say is, look, at the end of the day, you want to, which is very interesting, it was in financial services, so they have this mindset, is they said, look, I know what the error in my prediction is going to be, so I do a very worst case scenario, very best case scenario, and look at whether I make a profit in either one of these scenarios. If it makes sense, then I go ahead. So what you want to see is actually the scenario in terms of saying, what is my affordable risk here?
Yeah. And so on that topic, I would just encourage the MSI members on the call that they can always reach out to MSI if they have any of those kind of questions, and we can pair you up with an academic who might be able to do some of that rapid prototyping or simulation or experiments for you. I think we have time for one more question, maybe two if we get it. A quick question is, you had that great example of the financial services client and how they were using data analytics in one part of their organization but not on the brand side.
Yes.
Can you speculate how they could apply the data analytics to their brand story?
So one of the things they're trying to do is actually, I get this because they're engaged with us in terms of figuring out how to do this, and also first thing is education, right? So they have really smart people working in the brand division, but they are going through this process of, okay, what are the different ways in which we can learn about what is possible using data. And also what they're trying to do is they're also coming up with a new organizational structure like the way Google has with its pod structure, which also helps with the rapid prototyping, is have like people across different groups work in these pods, so that helps them understand different groups, and this group that was very good in analytics is part of each pod, so people understand what they're capable of. So one of the things they did try where they have got good successes, they took the analytics capability and applied it to paid search advertising, and they've gotten phenomenal results. And so that tells them that, okay, now we can take this and actually use this throughout. And so they're going through this process of prioritization of, okay, now what are the different things we need to do? And I think they want to test the next thing they want to do is copy testing and using data to do the copy testing better. So go one at a time, identify projects which are key and start using these as a one-off basis first, learn from these, show some success stories, and then spread it throughout their organization. I think the head wants more analytics, the CMO of this division, and they want now to use this spread across every member of the organization, and part of it is training, experimental projects, showing some successes, and then it's a long process, but that's how it is being done now.
Oh, that's great. Well, I want to thank you so much, Raj. And if Raj didn't get to your individual questions, or if there are additional things you'd like to discuss with him, we invite you to reach out directly to him. And his email is his last name, as it shows on the screen, Venkatesan, and then first initial R, at darden.virginia.edu. Or you could just Google Raj Kumar Venkatesan, and you'll find him as well. Our next webinar will be Creating Customer Experiences that Build Relationships with Professor Ruth Bolton on September 15th at 1 p.m. We look forward to seeing you there. And many thanks to the members of the MSI audience for participating in our member-to-member webinar series. And special thanks, Raj, to you.
Thank you, Kay. It was a pleasure doing this webinar. And as I said before, I look forward to interacting more. And if any of the members want to reach out, I'd be more than happy to work with them. Thank you.
Great.